The soft hum of the city faded into the background as rain traced slow, sorrowful patterns across the tall windows of the lawyer's office. Inside, beneath the dim glow of an antique chandelier, Liana Rivera sat motionless, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair as though holding on to the last thread of her old life. The scent of old paper and varnished wood filled the room, mingling with her silent despair. Her grandmother's will lay open before her, a document that should have meant freedom, security, and the promise of dreams fulfilled. Instead, it read like a sentence passed by fate itself. The attorney, a man with years of experience in watching families unravel over inheritance, spoke softly, as though trying not to break her any further. "Your grandmother left you everything, Miss Rivera," he said gently. "But she included one condition." The word echoed through her like thunder. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "What kind of condition?" He sighed and slid a folder toward her. "She wished for you to marry someone within 6 months of her passing. Someone of integrity, stability, and a respected position in society. Only then will the estate be released in your name." Liana felt her heart drop. It was absurd. Cruel even. She had just buried the only family she had left, the woman who raised her after her parents' tragic accident when she was only 7. Her grandmother had always been her strength, her wisdom, her reason to believe in goodness. And now, even in death, she had left her with an impossible task. "Marry?" Liana whispered. "But I don't even know anyone." "Not like that. There is one person your grandmother suggested," the lawyer added carefully. "Dr. Damien Hale." The name was familiar, too familiar. A brilliant cardiac surgeon. Revered in every medical journal, feared by every intern, known for saving lives with surgical precision, yet rumored to have the heart of a stone. He was a man who saw emotions as distractions, and compassion as weakness. To the world he was perfection wrapped in distance. To those who knew him closely, he was the man no one could ever truly reach. Liana blinked in disbelief. "Why him?" "Your grandmother knew him personally," the lawyer explained. "Your late grandfather mentored him years ago. Dr. Hale was like a son to them for a short time. She believed he could protect you." "Protect me?" Liana laughed bitterly, tears blurring her vision. "By marrying me? That's not protection. That's a transaction." The attorney hesitated. "I know this is difficult, but without the inheritance, your education, your medical degree, even the charity hospital you and your grandmother planned to build, it will all be impossible." She wanted to make sure you wouldn't be alone. Perhaps she trusted him to ensure that. The words cut deeper than any blade. Liana had spent years fighting her way through medical school, dreaming of one day opening a free clinic for children in the poorest parts of the city. She had no family wealth, no secret fund, nothing but the inheritance her grandmother left behind, and now it all hung by the fragile thread of a marriage she didn't want. When she finally stepped out into the rain that night, she didn't feel it. She walked through the streets of Verona like a ghost, her mind spiraling between fury, grief, and exhaustion. At 24, she had imagined a life of purpose, not one bound by a stranger's last wish. But as lightning cracked across the sky, she realized the truth with painful clarity. She had no choice. 3 days later, Liana stood in the cold marble lobby of Verona General Hospital, waiting for the man whose name now determined her future. The hospital was alive with the rhythm of urgency. Nurses rushing, intercoms echoing, the faint beeping of monitors whispering of lives being saved and lost. But even in the chaos, one presence commanded absolute stillness: Dr. Damien Hale. He appeared from the hallway with the precision of a shadow, tall, broad-shouldered, and unnervingly calm. His dark hair was neatly combed, his surgical coat crisp, his gaze as cold as the winter morning. The first thing she noticed were his eyes, pale gray like frost on glass, sharp enough to slice through pretense. "Miss Rivera," he said, his voice measured and formal. "I was told you wanted to discuss something regarding Mrs. Rivera's estate." She nodded, struggling to keep her composure. "It's about my grandmother's will." He motioned for her to follow him into his office, a pristine space of white and steel. No personal photos, no flowers, nothing to suggest that a living soul worked there. Only certificates, surgical models, and the faint antiseptic smell of sterility. He took a seat across from her, folding his hands neatly. "I'm aware of the condition in the will," he said before she could begin. "The lawyer contacted me." Liana's heart stuttered. "Then you already know what she asked?" He nodded once. Yes, marriage. Temporary, I assume, to satisfy the legal requirements. His tone was clinical, detached, as though they were discussing a medical case. Liana wanted to scream. You sound like this is just paperwork to you. He met her gaze without flinching. Because that's what it is. Her breath caught. You really think marriage is that meaningless? I think emotions complicate things, he replied coolly. Your grandmother wanted to secure your future. If this arrangement fulfills that purpose, then it's logical. Liana stood abruptly, anger flaring through her chest. Logical. This is my life, Dr. Hale, my dreams. My grandmother's legacy. You talk about it like we're signing a hospital supply contract. For the first time, his expression faltered, a brief flicker of something softer, perhaps regret or memory. But it vanished as quickly as it came. You're right, he said quietly. But I also owe your grandmother more than I can express. If this is what she wished, I'll honor it. She stared at him, stunned. You just agree like that? I don't see a reason not to, he said simply. I have no interest in love or companionship. My life is the hospital. A legal marriage changes nothing for me. You'll have financial freedom. I'll fulfill a promise. It's efficient. The word efficient felt like a slap. Still, beneath her anger, a strange calm settled in her chest. Maybe that was all she needed. A practical arrangement, no messy emotions, no heartbreak. Just two people bound by necessity. When? She asked. He looked up from his desk. You tell me. 1 week, she said, surprising herself with her own decisiveness. He nodded once. I'll have my lawyer handle the paperwork. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. Miss Rivera. She paused, hand on the door. Your grandmother used to say that love is not always warm. Sometimes it's the courage to stay, even when every part of you wants to run. His tone was almost unreadable, but something in his eyes, some small, buried shadow, made her heart ache in a way she didn't understand. Their wedding was as quiet as a whisper. No guests, no music, just a signature and 2 rings exchanged in the sterile light of a city courthouse. Damien stood beside her, composed and distant, his expression unchanged as the official pronounced them husband and wife. When it was over, he simply offered her his arm and said, Let's go. His home was as impersonal as his office, a modern penthouse of black marble and glass overlooking the city. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, the silence absolute. It was beautiful, yes, but lifeless. You'll stay in the east wing, Damien said, leading her up the grand staircase. I'll be in the west. You'll have your own space. If you need anything, the housekeeper comes every morning. Liana's laugh came out brittle. So we'll live like polite strangers? His gaze met hers, unflinching. It's what you wanted, isn't it? A business arrangement? She turned away, unable to answer. Maybe it was what she wanted. Maybe it was what she deserved for agreeing to this farce. Yet as she unpacked her few belongings into a room that looked more like a luxury hotel than a home, she couldn't help but feel the crushing weight of emptiness. Days turned into weeks, and silence became their language. Damien rose before dawn and returned long after midnight. His life revolved around surgeries, research, and precision. He rarely spoke, but every morning a cup of coffee appeared on her desk. Strong, dark, with 1 spoon of sugar. Exactly the way she liked it. She never saw him make it, but she knew it was him. It was a small gesture, almost invisible. But to Liana it meant everything. Because for the first time she began to wonder if beneath the frost of his demeanor, there was still something human left. One evening, as she studied at the kitchen counter, she heard the door open. Damien entered, exhaustion carved deep into his features. For once, he didn't go straight upstairs. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter beside her. You're studying late, he said quietly. She glanced up, surprised. Old habits. I'm preparing for my licensing exams. He nodded, looking at her notes. Cardiology. Following your grandmother's path. She always believed healing the heart meant more than repairing it, Liana said softly. She wanted to build a free children's clinic. That's what I want too. He was silent for a long time, staring at the glass in his hand. Your grandmother once told me that compassion is a surgeon's greatest strength. I never believed her. Why not? Because compassion can break you, he said simply, and walked away. That night, Liana lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She realized she didn't hate him. She pitied him. Because somewhere behind that wall of logic and precision was a man who had once cared too deeply and had been broken for it. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done testing either of them. One cold morning, while studying alone, Liana felt a sudden, crushing pain in her chest. It was sharp, suffocating, radiating to her arm. Her breath hitched, her vision blurred, and fear seized her. She was too young, too healthy for heart trouble, but the symptoms were undeniable. Her trembling fingers found her phone. "Damien," she whispered as the call connected. His voice came instantly, alert and sharp. "Liana, what's wrong?" My chest, it hurts. I can't breathe." He didn't hesitate. "Lie down. I'm calling an ambulance." "Don't move. I'm coming right now." She could hear him shouting orders, his voice tight with urgency. Then the line went silent. Minutes later, sirens pierced the air. Liana slipped into unconsciousness before she saw him rush through the hospital doors, his white coat flying behind him like a storm. When she awoke, the sterile ceiling above her blurred in the dim light. Her heart monitor beeped softly beside her, and there he was, Damien Hale, no longer composed or cold, but exhausted, unshaven, his eyes red with sleeplessness. "Welcome back," he whispered, his hand resting gently over hers. "What happened?" "Pericarditis," he said quietly. "An infection around your heart. You'll be fine now." She blinked, tears slipping down her temples. "You were supposed to be in surgery today." "I canceled it," he said simply. Her eyes widened. "You canceled surgery? For me?" He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Because when I got your call, nothing else mattered." The silence that followed was heavy, fragile, electric. She saw it then, the truth buried deep in his eyes. The man they called Heartless was terrified of losing her, and for the first time since their cold wedding, warmth began to bloom in the frozen halls of her heart. The pale light of dawn filtered through the hospital blinds, painting the sterile walls in shades of muted gold. The world outside had awakened again, indifferent to the lives altered in its quiet corners. Inside that small hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound breaking the silence. Liana stirred slightly, her eyelashes trembling as she turned her head toward the figure seated beside her bed. Dr. Damien Hale, the man the world believed incapable of feeling, sat motionless in the chair, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on her face with a kind of weary focus that didn't belong to a detached man of science. His shirt was rumpled, the first two buttons undone, his surgical ID still hanging loosely around his neck. He hadn't left her side for nearly 20 hours. For a man known to operate for 10 hours straight without showing fatigue, the exhaustion etched across his face now wasn't from physical labor. It was the exhaustion of fear. When Liana's eyes opened again, the first thing she saw was him, his expression unguarded, his jaw tense. And in that moment, something shifted quietly between them. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice weak but steady. Damien looked up, startled, as though caught doing something he wasn't supposed to. "Of course I did," he replied, his voice lower than usual. "I had to make sure you pulled through." He spoke as if it were obvious, but the tremor hidden beneath the words betrayed the truth. She studied him through half-lidded eyes. "You didn't have to cancel your surgeries. I know what that means for you, for your patients." He looked away, jaw tightening. "Don't remind me," he muttered. "But when I heard your voice on the phone..." He trailed off, his words dissolving into the quiet hum of the monitors. There was no logic left. Only the need to get to you. Liana's heart squeezed painfully, not from illness this time, but from the raw honesty that slipped through his calm facade. She could hardly believe that the same man who once defined marriage as a transaction could look at her like this, with worry written in every line of his face. "You're not as cold as you pretend to be," she said softly. He gave a bitter half-smile, leaning back in the chair. "Don't be fooled. I learned long ago that emotions cost too much." Her curiosity flared despite her fatigue. "Who taught you that?" He hesitated. For a moment his gaze drifted toward the window, where the light caught the reflection of his eyes, gray like fog, distant and unreadable. "My father," he said finally. He was a surgeon too. Brilliant, respected, feared. He believed compassion was a weakness that distracted from precision. I grew up watching him save lives while letting his own family crumble. When my mother died, I swore I'd never let emotion dictate my judgment. His voice was quiet but steady, and though it carried no tears, there was an ache buried beneath each syllable. Liana listened without interrupting, her heart aching for the boy he once must have been, trying to win his father's approval in a house where love was measured by achievement, not affection. Maybe he was wrong, she said finally. Maybe compassion isn't weakness. Maybe it's what makes us human. Damien didn't respond, but his silence wasn't dismissive this time. It was the silence of someone who wanted to believe her but didn't know how. The following days passed slowly. Liana's recovery was steady, though she wasn't allowed to leave the hospital yet. Damien visited her every morning before his rounds and every night after his last patient. He rarely spoke about his work, but she noticed how the staff looked at him, some with admiration, some with fear. He was respected, even revered, yet completely alone. The nurses whispered stories about him. The doctor who never smiled, who once refused to attend a colleague's wedding because it clashed with his research schedule. The man whose fiancée had left him 5 years ago, claiming he had no heart. Liana didn't ask if those rumors were true. She didn't need to. She could see the truth in his eyes, those quiet storms that never found a place to rest. On the 5th evening, as she sat propped up with a book in hand, Damien entered her room without his coat, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her, and for the first time since she had known him, there was the faintest hint of warmth in his voice. "I thought you might miss the morning blend," he said. She accepted the cup, smiling weakly. "I did. You make it better than the nurses." He sat across from her, loosening his tie. "That's because I actually care about proportions." She chuckled softly. "Is that your secret? Precision in everything?" He looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "It's easier to control ratios than people." There it was again, the quiet confession hidden behind logic. She wanted to reach across the table and tell him that not everything needed control, that sometimes letting go was its own kind of healing. But instead, she simply said, "Maybe people aren't meant to be controlled, Damien. Maybe they're meant to be understood." The sound of her saying his name seemed to catch him off guard. His gaze softened, and for the first time since she had met him, he smiled. A small, real smile that reached his eyes. "You're a strange woman, Liana Rivera," he murmured. "Most people don't try to understand me." "Maybe that's their loss," she replied quietly, and for a long moment they simply sat there, the silence between them turning warm instead of heavy. When she was finally discharged a week later, Damien insisted on driving her home. The city was bathed in soft twilight, and the rhythmic sound of rain against the car window filled the spaces where words failed. She watched him from the corner of her eye, his hands steady on the steering wheel, his profile sharp against the fading light. There was something almost peaceful about him when he wasn't trying to be perfect. "Do you ever rest?" she asked suddenly. He smirked faintly. "Rest is for the unambitious." She shook her head. "No. Rest is for the living." Her words hung in the air between them, and for a brief moment she saw something flicker across his expression. Guilt, maybe. "You sound like my grandmother," he said quietly. "She used to tell me that too." "I think she was right," Liana said. "You can't keep saving everyone else if you never save yourself." He didn't reply, but his knuckles tightened slightly around the steering wheel. When they reached the penthouse, the city light shimmered below like a sea of stars. Damien parked the car and turned off the engine, his jaw working as though he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, he said, "You don't have to stay here if you don't want to. I know this isn't the life you imagined." Liana turned to him, surprised. "And where would I go?" He looked away, his voice low. "Anywhere you choose. I'll make sure you have what you need. You don't owe me anything." She felt a pang in her chest that had nothing to do with her illness. "Maybe I want to stay," she said softly. "Maybe it's not about owing anymore." He glanced at her, and something fragile passed between them. An understanding, a truce, a spark neither dared to name. Over the next few weeks, their silent routine began to change. Liana started leaving small traces of life around the sterile penthouse. Flowers on the dining table, a warm light left on in the evenings, music playing softly in the background. Damien never commented, but she noticed the way his eyes lingered on those little things when he thought she wasn't looking. Slowly, the house that once felt like a museum began to feel like a home. Sometimes she would find him reading in the living room late at night, the glow of the fireplace softening his features. Other times he would join her for dinner. The conversation awkward at first, but gradually easier. They talked about everything except their marriage. It was as if naming it would shatter the fragile peace that had grown between them. One evening, while she was cooking, she cut her finger slightly. It wasn't serious, but Damien was beside her in an instant, his reaction instinctive and almost frantic. He grabbed her hand, pressing a napkin against the small wound. "You should be more careful," he said sharply, his tone laced with worry disguised as irritation. "It's just a scratch," she laughed. His grip loosened, but he didn't let go. "You scared me," he admitted quietly, almost to himself. She looked up at him then, and for the first time she saw the truth, not the cold. Untouchable surgeon the world admired, but the man terrified of losing another piece of his fragile peace. "You don't have to be afraid of caring, Damien," she said gently. "It doesn't make you weak." His eyes met hers, gray against the soft glow of the kitchen light. "You say that as if it's easy." "It's not," she replied. "But maybe it's worth it." For a moment, neither moved. Then slowly he released her hand, stepping back, his walls trembling but not yet broken. "Dinner's burning," he murmured, and the tension dissolved into soft laughter. That night, after she had gone to her room, Damien stood by the window, staring at the city far below. He could still feel the warmth of her hand in his. He had spent years mastering control, believing that detachment was safety. But now, with Liana under his roof, her laughter echoing faintly down the hall, he realized how dangerous it was to feel again, because caring for her wasn't part of the arrangement. It was something far more terrifying, something he could no longer ignore. And as the rain began to fall again against the glass, Damien Hale, the man they called Heartless, finally allowed himself to whisper the truth he had buried for years. "She's changing everything." The early days of spring carried a softness that seemed to seep into the Rivera Hale penthouse. Sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows, touching everything it fell upon with quiet grace. The scent of fresh flowers drifted from the vases that Liana had placed around the house, and for the first time since she moved in, the silence between her and Damien no longer felt cold. It felt alive. Their routine had shifted so subtly that neither of them noticed when it happened. They began sharing breakfast not because they planned to, but because he no longer left before dawn. He started waiting for her coffee to brew before heading out, and she found herself looking forward to the faint click of his shoes on the marble floor, that single reminder she wasn't alone anymore. Every evening, when Damien returned from the hospital, Liana would be there, sometimes reading by the window, sometimes sketching, sometimes simply lost in thought. He didn't disturb her, but he lingered nearby, quietly present. It was an unspoken companionship born not from duty, but from something deeper, something that neither dared to name. Still, the walls that protected Damien's heart didn't crumble all at once. They cracked in slow, almost imperceptible ways. One night, after a particularly long surgery, Damien returned home past midnight. Liana was still awake, sitting on the couch with her textbooks scattered around her. She looked up when he entered, her eyes lighting up briefly before softening into concern. "You look exhausted," she said gently. He removed his coat, sighing as he loosened his tie. It was a complicated case. A boy barely 12. He needed a heart transplant, but the donor organ was delayed by hours. We nearly lost him twice before the surgery even began. His voice trembled slightly, betraying the fatigue he tried to hide. Liana's heart clenched at the vulnerability in his tone. "Did he make it?" she asked softly. Damien nodded, though his eyes looked distant. "Yes, for now." She watched him sink into the couch, his head leaning back, the weight of years of suppressed emotion pressing down on his shoulders. Without thinking, she rose and brought him a glass of water. He accepted it quietly, their fingers brushing briefly. That small contact sent a tremor through both of them, soft, real, human. For a long time they sat in silence, the quiet hum of the city below filling the spaces their words could not. Finally, Damien spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "When I was your age, I used to believe that saving lives would fill the emptiness inside me. But the more people I saved, the emptier I became." Liana turned to him, her brow furrowing. "Why?" "Because," he said after a pause, "for every person I brought back, there was another I couldn't. Every success only reminded me of the ones I failed." He rubbed his temples, exhaustion shadowing his features. "My fiancé died 5 years ago during surgery. A car accident. I performed the operation myself. I thought I could save her, that if I was good enough, precise enough, I could stop death. But she died on the table. His words broke something inside the quiet room. Liana froze, her heart aching as she saw the raw pain behind his calm facade. I stopped believing in compassion that day, he continued, staring at the floor, because compassion made me weak. It made me care too much, and caring destroyed me. Liana's eyes glistened as she whispered, "You blamed yourself." He looked up then, his gray eyes filled with quiet torment. Every second since that night, the confession hung heavy between them, filling the air with the weight of truth. Liana wanted to reach out to touch his hand, to tell him that no one, not even the best surgeon, could play God. But she knew that words couldn't heal wounds buried that deep. So instead she sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching, and said softly, "Maybe compassion didn't destroy you, Damien. Maybe it's the only thing keeping you alive." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly something in his gaze softened, a fragile surrender like ice melting under sunlight. "You sound like her," he murmured. "Your fiancée?" He shook his head. "Your grandmother." That night, Damien didn't go to his separate wing. He stayed on the couch, asleep before dawn, his usually guarded face at peace for the first time in years. When Liana saw him there the next morning, she didn't wake him. Instead, she covered him with a blanket and whispered, "Maybe this is what healing looks like." Days turned into weeks, and with each passing one, the distance between them shrank. They began cooking together, disastrous at first but filled with laughter. He learned to eat meals that didn't come from hospital cafeterias, and she learned that he could, on rare occasions, smile. When he smiled, it transformed his face, making him look younger, warmer, almost human again. One evening after dinner, they walked together on the rooftop terrace. The city lights shimmered beneath them like an ocean of stars. The wind played with Liana's hair as she leaned against the railing, her gaze lost in the horizon. Damien stood beside her, hands in his pockets, his voice soft. "I never realized how beautiful this view was," he said. She turned to him, surprised. "You've lived here for years." "I never looked," he admitted. That small statement carried the weight of a lifetime. He had built walls so high that he forgot what was outside them, and now, standing beside her, he saw not just the city but life itself through new eyes. Their closeness didn't go unnoticed. The housekeeper smiled knowingly when she saw them talking quietly in the kitchen, their laughter echoing faintly down the marble halls. Even the hospital staff whispered about the change in Dr. Hale, how the once untouchable surgeon now seemed lighter. He still demanded perfection, but there was warmth in his eyes where there used to be ice. Yet, as life began to bloom again around them, the shadow of the past lingered quietly, waiting. One evening, Damien returned home looking troubled. He poured himself a glass of water, his movements slow and deliberate. Liana sensed it instantly. "What happened?" she asked. He hesitated, then sighed. "The boy from last month?" He relapsed. "Complications. I have to operate again tomorrow. The risk is high." She placed her hand gently on his arm. "You'll save him. You always do." He looked at her then, his voice breaking slightly. "You don't understand. His condition, it's the same as hers. The same as my fiancé's. I've been avoiding this kind of surgery for years, and now it's come back to me." Liana squeezed his arm gently. "Then maybe this is your chance, not just to save him, but to forgive yourself." He didn't reply, but the look in his eyes told her that her words had struck somewhere deep. That night, he couldn't sleep. He paced the halls of his penthouse, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. His mind replayed that night from 5 years ago. The flashing lights, the cold operating table, the moment her pulse flatlined beneath his hands. He had buried that part of himself, convinced that feeling nothing was safer than feeling everything. But Liana had changed that. She had made him feel again, and that terrified him. The next morning, before leaving for the hospital, he found her waiting by the door. "You don't have to face this alone," she said softly. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes but tried to. "I already am," he said, and walked away. Hours later, Liana sat in the waiting area, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Damien hadn't wanted her there, but she couldn't leave. She knew how much this surgery meant, not just to the patient, but to the man performing it. The clock ticked slowly, each minute stretching like an eternity. When the doors finally opened and Damien stepped out, his scrubs were stained with sweat, his expression unreadable. For a moment she feared the worst. Then he looked at her and said quietly, "He's alive." She exhaled shakily, tears filling her eyes. "You did it." He nodded, exhaustion softening his voice. "No, we did it. You believed when I couldn't." In that moment, something inside him broke and healed. He realized that the strength he had been searching for wasn't in shutting the world out. It was in letting someone in. That night, as the city slept, Liana found him standing on the balcony again, the wind tousling his hair. She walked up beside him, silent for a moment before speaking. "You saved him. And maybe you saved yourself too." He turned toward her, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "Maybe I did," he whispered. Then, after a pause, he added, "You know, when we got married, I told myself it was just an arrangement. But lately, it feels like something else." Her breath caught, but before she could respond, he reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, hesitant, but it carried the weight of everything he couldn't say. "You make this place feel like home," he said softly. "You make me feel human again." The wind carried their silence like a prayer. Neither confessed love. Not yet. But they didn't need to. It was there, in every glance, every quiet act of care, every heartbeat that echoed louder in the spaces between words. And as the night deepened, Liana realized something profound, that sometimes the most broken hearts don't need fixing. They just need someone brave enough to stay. The first days of summer came quietly to Verona, the kind of golden warmth that softened even the hardest edges of the city. In the penthouse, the morning light poured through the glass walls like liquid fire, glinting against the marble floors, filling the once cold space with life. Liana stood by the kitchen window, stirring a pot of coffee, her movements slow and thoughtful. It had been 3 weeks since Damien's critical surgery, 3 weeks since he confronted the ghosts of his past and won. Yet the air between them had changed in ways neither could explain. Something fragile but beautiful had begun to take root. The house no longer echoed with silence. Laughter, conversation, and the clatter of shared meals had replaced the emptiness. But even as peace settled into their days, both of them sensed that fate was holding its breath, waiting for the next test. Damien returned home earlier now, often without his usual burden of hospital files. He had started joining Liana for dinner on the terrace, where the wind carried the scent of jasmine from the rooftop garden she had nurtured. They would sit for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes simply listening to the hum of the city below. It felt as if time had slowed down for them, as if, after years of running from pain, they had finally found the courage to be still. Yet beneath that serenity, Damien carried a quiet tension that Liana couldn't ignore. She saw it in the way his gaze drifted when he thought she wasn't looking, or how he sometimes touched the small scar on his wrist, a habit born from guilt that refused to fade. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Liana set the table with care. She had cooked his favorite, roasted vegetables with her grandmother's secret sauce, and for dessert, a small tiramisu she'd learned to make just for him. When Damien entered, he paused at the sight, his brows lifting in quiet surprise. "You've outdone yourself again," he said, taking his seat across from her. "I didn't think you'd have time with your exams approaching." She smiled, pouring him a glass of wine. "Cooking helps me think. Besides, you've been working too hard again. You promised to take a break this week." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "The hospital doesn't believe in promises, I'm afraid." She studied him, her eyes filled with warmth. "Then maybe you should start believing in yourself more than the hospital." Her words caught him off guard. He looked up slowly, meeting her gaze. "You talk like my life belongs to someone else," he said. "Sometimes," she replied softly. It feels like it does. You give every part of yourself to others, Damien. Your skill, your strength, your time. And yet you keep nothing for yourself. You can't pour from an empty heart forever. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy with unspoken meaning. Damien leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "You sound like your grandmother again," he murmured. "Maybe that's a good thing," Liana said with a faint smile. She believed broken people could still build beautiful lives. After dinner, they moved to the terrace. The city shimmered below them, each light a reminder of the countless lives Damien had touched. The wind was warm, and for a long while, they simply stood side by side, watching the horizon. Then, unexpectedly, Damien spoke. "I got a call from the hospital board today," he said quietly. "They want me to take over as head of surgical research. It would mean more responsibility, longer hours, travel, and constant pressure." Liana's heart sank. "That sounds like everything you just escaped." He nodded, his eyes unreadable. "It is, but it's also everything I've worked for." She looked away, trying to hide her disappointment. "What will you do?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned toward her, the soft glow of the terrace light tracing the lines of his face. "That's the problem," he said slowly. "For the first time in years, I don't know." His voice carried a rare vulnerability, the kind that came from a man who had spent his entire life certain of every decision. "When I'm at the hospital, everything makes sense. Every problem has a solution, every equation has an answer. But when I'm here, with you, nothing fits into logic anymore." Liana's breath caught. Maybe that's because not everything worth having makes sense. He stared at her, the weight of her words settling deep within him. Then without warning, he reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingertips lingering near her temple. "You always know what to say," he whispered. She smiled faintly, her heart pounding. "Maybe I just see the things you try to hide." Their eyes met, and in that stillness something unspoken passed between them. A confession without words, a promise without form. For the first time since their arranged marriage, it didn't feel like a contract or an obligation. It felt like destiny, quiet, patient, and real. The next morning, Liana awoke to the smell of coffee drifting through the air. Damien was in the kitchen, still in his scrubs, preparing breakfast with uncharacteristic focus. She blinked in surprise. He never cooked. "You're up early," she said, smiling. He glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd try returning the favor." She sat down, watching him pour coffee with careful precision. "Something's bothering you," she said gently. He set the pot down and exhaled. "I've been offered a position overseas, a medical program in Geneva. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'd be leading research that could save thousands of children." Her heart faltered. "That's incredible." "It is," he agreed quietly. "But it would mean leaving for 2 years." The words hung between them like a verdict. Liana looked down at her hands, her mind racing. 2 years. A lifetime in their fragile new world. "And you want to go?" she said softly. "I don't know what I want," he admitted. "For the first time, I'm not sure if leaving would feel like progress or loss." Liana forced a smile, though her chest ached. "You've always put others first. Maybe it's time to choose for yourself." But as the day went on, her words haunted her. She tried to focus on her studies, but her heart refused to settle. The thought of the empty penthouse, the cold mornings without his quiet presence felt unbearable. Yet she knew she couldn't ask him to stay. Love, true love, wasn't about possession. It was about freedom. That night, Damien found her on the balcony again, her eyes red from unshed tears. "You're crying," he said quietly, stepping closer. "I'm fine," she lied. He sighed, his voice low. "Liana, I don't know how to do this, how to want something that isn't rational. You've changed everything. Before you, I didn't even remember what it meant to feel." She turned to him, her voice trembling. "Then don't stop feeling now." His hand reached for hers, fingers intertwining as if they were meant to fit all along. "If I stay, I'll regret giving up the opportunity to help more people," he said. "But if I go, I'll regret leaving you." Her heart broke at the honesty in his tone. Then maybe the answer isn't in choosing one over the other. Maybe it's in finding a way to do both. He looked at her for a long moment, the reflection of city lights flickering in his eyes. "You really believe there's a way?" "I believe in you," she said simply, "and I believe your heart will tell you what logic never can." The next morning, Damien left early, a rare uncertainty shadowing his usual confidence. Liana watched him go, her chest tightening with every step he took toward the unknown. For 2 days, she didn't hear from him. The silence gnawed at her, but she didn't call. She trusted him to find his own clarity. On the third evening, as rain whispered against the windows, she sat curled on the couch, staring at her grandmother's locket in her hand. Inside was a faded photograph, her grandmother smiling beside a much younger Damien back when hope still glowed in his eyes. She ran her thumb over the picture, whispering, "Please help him find his way." Moments later, the sound of the front door opening made her look up. Damien stood there, drenched from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead, his breath uneven. He crossed the room in quick strides, stopping just a step away from her. "I turned down Geneva," he said, his voice rough but resolute. Liana's eyes widened. "What, why?" He exhaled, water dripping from his coat. "Because I realized something while I was gone. I've spent my whole life running toward the next achievement, the next life to save, thinking it would fill the emptiness inside me. But the truth is, no award, no position, no research could ever replace what I found here." His hand lifted to touch her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You showed me what it means to live, Liana. For years I saved hearts that beat, but you gave mine a reason to." The confession shattered the last of his walls. Liana's tears flowed freely now, her heart swelling with emotion too big to contain. "Damien," she whispered, "I didn't want you to give up your dreams for me." "I didn't," he said gently. "I just finally understood that dreams mean nothing if you have no one to share them with." She took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Then let's build something together, something that matters." He smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile she had ever seen from him. "I think your grandmother would have liked that." They stood there for a long moment, the rain falling softly beyond the glass, the world outside fading into nothing. Two broken souls, once bound by circumstance, now bound by choice. The man who had once feared emotion had finally learned to trust it, and the woman who once felt powerless had found the courage to love without condition. Later that night, as they sat together watching the storm pass, Damien turned to her, his voice quiet but firm. "I want to start that clinic you and your grandmother dreamed about, a place for children who can't afford care. We'll call it the Rivera Foundation." Liana's eyes filled with light. "You'd do that?" "I would," he said simply. "For you, for her, for every life that still has a chance." The city lights flickered like constellations beyond the glass, and in that moment the world felt vast yet intimate, a space big enough for healing, forgiveness, and hope. Damien reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers as though sealing a promise written not on paper, but in their very souls. That night, the rain finally stopped, leaving behind the quiet scent of renewal, and as the moon rose over Verona, shining through the clouds, Liana realized that love wasn't something that came to those who waited. It came to those who dared to stay, to heal, and to believe again. A full year had passed since the night Damien came home drenched in rain and told Liana that he had chosen her over Geneva, and yet every day since, life seemed to bloom in ways neither of them had imagined. The once silent penthouse had transformed into a place filled with warmth, laughter, and the kind of quiet chaos that made it feel like a home. The terrace garden was now a riot of color. The kitchen smelled of roasted coffee each morning. The faint hum of conversation often drifted from the study where plans for their clinic were taking shape. For the first time in years, Damien Hale looked like a man who belonged not just to his work, but to the world again. And Liana, who had once believed her life was dictated by her grandmother's condition, had discovered that sometimes the chains we think bind us are actually the paths that lead us to freedom. The Rivera Foundation Clinic opened its doors on a bright April morning. The building was modest but beautiful, its glass facade gleaming under the sun, and its walls painted in soft blues and whites, the colors of calm and healing. A carved plaque by the entrance bore an inscription that read, "For every heart that dared to hope again." It was Liana's idea, and Damien had agreed without hesitation. On opening day, the small courtyard was filled with children, parents, volunteers, and medical staff, all gathered to witness the beginning of something extraordinary. Damien stood at the podium, his once reserved demeanor replaced by quiet confidence. "This clinic," he said, his voice steady and sincere, "isn't just about medicine. It's about compassion, the kind of compassion that saves not just the body but the soul. Years ago I thought feeling made me weak. I was wrong. Feeling makes us human." His gaze found Liana in the crowd, her eyes glistening with pride. "This clinic exists because one woman believed in love that heals, and another reminded me how to find it again." The applause that followed echoed through the courtyard like the sound of new beginnings. In the months that followed, the Rivera Foundation grew into a sanctuary for those who had nowhere else to turn. Children with heart conditions from the city's poorest neighborhoods came through its doors, and many left with smiles that had once seemed impossible. Liana managed the administrative side while continuing her pediatric training, and Damien led the surgical team with renewed purpose. But unlike before, he no longer treated his staff with cold distance. He laughed with them, mentored them, even joined their late-night discussions over cheap coffee and tired smiles. The staff began to call him the doctor with the second heart, the first for surgery, the second for kindness. Yet, as with all stories born from struggle, peace did not come without its trials. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Liana was reviewing patient charts when Damien walked in, his expression unusually tense. He handed her a file, the kind that made his hands tremble slightly. "This boy," he said, "his name is Marco. He's 8 years old, advanced cardiomyopathy, end stage. The local hospital turned him away. We're his last option." Liana scanned the report, her stomach tightening. "He needs a transplant," she whispered. "And fast." Damien nodded grimly. "We're on the waiting list, but it could take weeks and maybe months. His condition won't last that long." She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "There's no other way?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "There's an experimental procedure. Risky, untested. It could save him, or it could end his life faster." Liana studied him, realizing what he was truly saying. This wasn't just another case. It was a mirror of his past, another chance to rewrite the story that had haunted him for years. "You're afraid," she said softly. He looked at her, the conflict in his eyes raw and unhidden. "I can't lose another one, Liana, not again." She stepped closer, placing her hand gently against his chest where his heartbeat trembled beneath her palm. "You're not the man who lost her anymore. You're the man who learned to love again. You have to trust that." That night, neither of them slept. Damien sat in his office at the clinic, staring at the surgical plan, every instinct at war with his fear. Liana watched from the doorway, the glow of the desk lamp outlining the fatigue in his face. She walked to him quietly, setting a cup of coffee beside his hand. "You told me once that compassion makes us human," she whispered. "Maybe it's time to prove that again, for Marco, for yourself." He looked up at her then, his gray eyes filled with a storm of doubt and longing. "If I fail," he began, but she cut him off softly. "If you fail, at least you'll fail trying to save someone, not running from your heart." The next morning, the surgery began. The entire clinic seemed to hold its breath as Damien and his team worked through the endless hours, every second balanced between hope and despair. Liana waited outside the operating room, her hands clasped tightly, whispering silent prayers. It felt as though the whole world had paused. When the doors finally opened, Damien stepped out, his scrubs stained and his shoulders slumped, but his eyes were alive. "He made it," he said hoarsely, his heart's beating. Liana covered her mouth, tears spilling freely as she ran into his arms. He caught her, holding her tightly as if anchoring himself to the moment. For the first time in years, the weight that had shadowed him lifted completely. The past had finally let go. The success of Marco's surgery marked a turning point, not just for the clinic but for Damien himself. News of the miracle spread quickly, drawing attention from medical circles across Europe. But when reporters asked for interviews, Damien declined them all. "The credit belongs to the team," he said, "and to a boy brave enough to keep fighting." Liana, watching him from afar, realized how much he had changed. The man who once sought control and perfection now understood that real strength came from surrender, surrendering to faith, to love, to the unpredictability of life. As summer turned to autumn, the clinic celebrated its first anniversary. Children who had once arrived pale and fragile now ran through the halls, their laughter echoing off the walls like music. Damien stood by the window of his office, watching them play. Liana entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee, their familiar ritual now a daily comfort. "You look peaceful," she said with a smile. He turned to her, his gaze soft. "I think I finally am." She handed him the cup, their fingers brushing, a silent reminder of the journey that had brought them here. "You know," she said, leaning against the desk, "I sometimes wonder if my grandmother planned all of this. If she somehow knew that making me marry you would heal us both." Damien chuckled quietly. "If she did, she was far wiser than we ever gave her credit for." He took a sip of coffee, his expression turning thoughtful. "When she made you part of her will, she must have seen something neither of us could. 2 broken people meant to fix each other." Liana looked at him, her heart swelling with quiet affection. "We weren't broken," she said softly. "We were just waiting for the right hands to put us back together." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers, his thumb brushing her wedding ring. "And now that we are?" he asked. She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Now we help others do the same." That night, they hosted a small celebration at the clinic. Staff, patients, and friends gathered under strings of warm lights in the courtyard. Damien gave a short speech, simple but powerful. "A year ago, this clinic was just an idea born from pain. Today, it's proof that even the most wounded hearts can learn to heal again. I spent years thinking that saving lives was my purpose. But I've learned that it's not just about saving lives, and it's about changing them. And mine was changed by a woman who taught me that love isn't a distraction from life. It's the reason for it." His words drew soft applause, but Liana's smile was what truly filled the night with light. When the guests had gone and the lanterns flickered low, Damien and Liana stood alone in the courtyard. The air was cool, scented with roses and the faint echo of laughter. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the lights. "You know," he said quietly, "there was a time I thought I didn't have a heart, but now I can't imagine a world without you in it." She stepped closer, her hands resting against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath. "That's because you never lost your heart, Damien. You just forgot where you left it." He smiled, a smile that held years of redemption and gratitude. "And you reminded me." They stayed like that, wrapped in silence, the world around them fading into nothing but the beating of 2 hearts that had finally found their way home. The story that had begun as an obligation had become a testament to resilience. Proof that even when life forces us into choices we never wanted, sometimes those choices lead us exactly where we were meant to be. As dawn broke over the city, Damien and Liana stood hand in hand at the gates of the clinic, watching the first light of morning spill across the streets. "What do we do now?" Liana asked softly. He squeezed her hand gently. "We keep healing," he said, "one heart at a time." And so they did. The years that followed saw the Rivera Foundation expand to other cities, saving thousands of lives, inspiring young doctors, and offering hope where there once was none. But for Damien and Liana, the true miracle wasn't in the surgeries or the accolades. It was in the quiet mornings spent sharing coffee, in the laughter that filled their home, and in the simple truth that love, when found, can rewrite even the coldest story into something warm and eternal. In the end, it wasn't fate that had bound them. It was choice. The choice to forgive, to stay, to love, and to believe that no matter how broken a heart may be, it can always remember how to beat again.